Welcome back. In the modern day of relationships, couples are getting married and having children later in life, which places a new kind of stress on couples as they try to balance work life, parent life and relationships with their other halves.
Joining us today is family therapist Richard Hogan, who'll explain what is different for the modern couple and how they can navigate their difficulties. Good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning, Richard. Good to see you.
We were just talking about it all, and indeed people do meet their partners later in life for the most part these days, which I would have thought is quite a positive thing because you've given it great consideration.
Yes, you have indeed.
But life and married life is not easy.
Not easy. And I would say, traditionally, my parents, that generation of the 60s would have got married much earlier. At 19, 20 would have been the norm. In modern terms, around 32 is kind of the norm of getting married. The average person getting married is around 32. But in modern terms, there's more, I think, pressures facing a couple because there's so many unique stressors on that relationship, like technology, mobile phone devices. That is definitely interrupting and intruding on communicational patterns. Also, our expectations. I would say your expectations from your mother when she got married, and for me, from my father when they got married, are different. We expect more from our partner, and because we're getting in later, as you said, Anna, we're thinking more about the person we marry.
Well, because of the times, say back in the 50s, 60s, even earlier, did it change the way people went into a relationship in terms of when you got married, it was a commitment for life? Because there was no way out. Whereas now, you know, people are, well, they can separate, they can get divorced, you know. Well,
I think that's a very important point. I think traditionally marriage might have been, especially for women, to endure. And I think thankfully that's changed. Women are now thinking about, you know, they expect something from their partner. And sometimes they might have unrealistic expectations about what their partner is going to... You know, I'd often hear in the therapeutic setting a female client saying to me, he was a real fixer-upper. You know, and I thought I could...
He was a project.
He was a project,
right.
Like a building.
Like a house, And he just needed a bit of work, but he was grand.
He was a labour of love.
He was a fixer-upper, but the foundations weren't great. So it fell down. And you'd see that, you know, a lot, that people have those unrealistic expectations. I suppose, you know, Hollywood feeds into that too.
Listen, you've 4 points here, but I just, from a really nosy point of view, you see clients all the time and you see couples together. Would you find one partner having a word in your ear beforehand to try and steer things in a certain direction, or...?
Well, no, you would try to avoid that as a therapist in the space. You try to give everyone equal, you know, and allow each voice to come out. But what I often find is what you're kind of talking about. Sometimes couples come and one partner has already made a decision that they're going to dissolve the relationship, and they might try to use the therapist to make that, you know, that splitting a little bit more comfortable or less. So
you split us up because I don't have the...
It can be like that a little bit in the therapeutic space sometimes, it can be.
You mentioned communication. That's the first thing you wanted to talk about. Lines of communication and levels of communication. And you talk about the phone getting in the way.
Yeah, well, when you think about it yourself, when you come home from work, it could be about 7 o'clock. You put the kids, let's say if you've got children involved, by the time they get to bed, you've fed everybody, they're in bed, it's probably 8:30, 9 o'clock. You sit down. You might only have... At that point, about an hour or two together. And you might want, as you said earlier, Anna, you might want to say everything very quickly to your partner. And they might be tired or, you know, going through something that's gone on during the day. And then you've got devices thrown in the middle of that. And you're sitting down, and it's kind of this kind of paradoxical thing you get involved in as a relationship. You use the device to soothe yourself, you know, satiate your kind of, like, you know, stress. But what you're actually doing is you're a bit of emotional avoidance. You're sitting with your partner, but you're actually miles away from them.
So you're removing yourself.
You're removing, then you're creating more stress on your relationship.
Yes.
You know?
Would it be typical in most households, or is it just mine, that the female arrives home and wants to kind of share everything straight away, you know, and here's what happened to me, and blah, 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 blah. Whereas my other half would... Something gigantic could have happened that day, and it might be 10 or 11 o'clock at night before it'll come out. It's like there's a decompression going on, and he's processing it himself.
Yeah, we might be slower at processing things than women are, Simon. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it varies from house to house and person to person, you know.
But I think what Anna's saying, there is that, you know, that dichotomy between man and woman, and that is something that you have to negotiate as a couple. You want to say everything very quickly, and your husband wants to kind of almost decompress and kind of, you know, ease into the afternoon together. And there is that negotiating and knowing your husband and knowing the way he likes to communicate, and kind of, and then also him knowing how you like to communicate, and having that kind of understanding of each other is very important for a successful relationship.
And not expecting them to behave the way you would.
Exactly, not expecting them to be, you know, as you want them to be.
Yes, of
the
course.
mobile phone policy and decreasing emotional avoidance. They're tied together, are they?
I think nothing has interrupted or intruded on relationships more than technology, to be honest. And it's what I'd say when Anna says, is there any kind of commonality amongst relationships coming into the therapeutic setting? That would be the biggest one.
Really?
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
sure they said it in the 60s and 70s when like television's like, you've stopped on, I mean, all you do is watching that.
Yeah, but then we still have television, right?
Yeah.
So now we just got an extra thing, which is actually more immersive. You get lost in
Yeah.
it more. And then we're always, because we're busy, we got our emails coming in, and you've got, you know, different like apps like WhatsApp. The whole family are connected, and everyone, you're on your phone all the time. And it really is devastating for couples.
So what kind of policies do we need to come up with
what I
that,
think
are,
about,
that are sensible and kind of realistic, I
As
suppose?
I'm saying this, I can hear my own wife laughing a bit, kind of going, I can hear her going, what a hypocrite. Because sometimes when I'm at home, she'd say to me, now, your phone, and it's pinging away, and I hear, you know, I've got emails coming in, I have to deal with it. But sometimes I really have to say to myself, 8 o'clock, that's it, I'm going to put it away for at least an hour and a half. And then have a sneaky look before I go to bed to see what came in.
It's such an addiction,
But it is that,
isn't it?
it is that jackpot syndrome,
but for 2
isn't it?
hours, I will say no technology. Or if we go for a walk, I will say, I'm leaving the phone behind.
Yes, okay.
Because, you know, we're so connected
Yeah.
all the time. We're never free from it. And it impacts on our intimacy levels. Because when you think about when you start out in a relationship, you listen to each other so intently.
Yeah.
You know? And then when you get into it, you get more familiar with each other. You think you hear what the other person is saying. And then you're with your device all the time. So, I mean, it is something that really needs policy as a couple goes forward in their life.
The last point you made on the graphic we had up a moment ago was reauthoring the narrative. Explain what that means.
Yeah, that's an idea that comes out of systemic family psychotherapy. When we start off in a relationship together, we have stories about ourselves that we develop, right? And that we think them about each. We're interesting, we're fascinating, we're loving, we're caring. But as you go forward in that trajectory, and like say kids come into the story, then you look at your partner maybe differently, and little narratives get rewritten. You might say he's lazy, you know, he doesn't bring out the bins. So these little sub-narratives become major narratives, and you forget the ones about the early narratives of like, you know, he's interesting, he's caring, he's loving. You forget those ones because these ones are more prominent and more current.
And quite often the biggest arguments can be over the most ridiculous small things.
Absolutely, and that's the small little narrative becoming a major narrative. So it's about reauthoring.
But also,
back
you
to
can't
those.
just be interesting and caring once.
No.
You've got to maintain the original ones, keep them going, as well as doing the other ones,
but
don't
that's
you?
the trick, though, Simon,
That's
isn't
the
it?
trick. Oh, yeah, it's spinning plates.
And then when you're like, you know, you do enter into almost like a working relationship with your partner because you're, you know, you're tipping them. You're on. I'm going to bed. You're minding the kids.
It does become that with kids, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's like,
You do that, and I do that, and then we both do that together, and then we'll do that, and then you do that, and before you know it, you're asleep.
You're right.
You're just
And then,
gone.
and on top of that, then difficulties are going to come into your life. I mean, you know, you're going to face challenges.
Of
Like
course,
my daughter was born 16 months ago, and she had a very rare condition, and we had 3 months in hospital, and that brought an awful lot of stress into our lives.
It did, yeah.
And as a couple, I often felt, I mean, this is really stressful for us. And then we had 2 other daughters to look after in the middle of all that.
of course. And that's the unplanned
And that's
stuff.
the unplanned stress. And if you go into marriage or you go into a relationship expecting it all to be plain sailing and not to meet challenges, you're going to have a very difficult
But when you
time.
come out the other side of that, Rachel, 9 times out of 10, I'd imagine it's made it stronger.
That's what I
'Cause you
feel.
got through
and
it.
that's how we reframe it, myself and my wife. We're stronger now because of that.
Yeah, of course.
You know? Yeah.
Fascinating stuff.
How is your daughter?
Yeah, she's flying now, thanks, Anna.
Is she?
Yeah, she's
Good.
doing very well. She's tormenting us, keeping us up. And
Good,
doing everything
fantastic.
she should be doing.
She's
All
fighting
systems
fit.
go, so. Good to see you, Richard. Thanks
Richard,
very
thank
much.
you very much,
Thanks a
as
lot.
always. Now, up next, it's all about the winter coat fashion is coming up after this quick break.